All right, Kayla. Well, I am so excited you were able to join me on my podcast, Leaving a Rich Legacy. So, this podcast really came about when I think about like my own self love and healing journey and things that I discovered about myself, as well as what I discovered we just don't talk about in our community. And I consider it like a love letter to my younger self, whether that's, when I was a child, a teenager, my 20s or early 30s, like things that I wish I would have known and conversations I wish I would have had, whether that was with family, friends, romantic partners, co-workers, just things I wish we would have talked about. So this is really, really, really special and dear to me.
Yeah.
And when I thought about just some of the conversations I wanted to have, really, really hearing from the male perspective, you came to mind just based on some of our discussions when we were at the singles house at the end of May, and just your thought process on a lot of different things. So I'm so excited that you can be here.
Yes.
So
Yes.
first, I'll let you just kind of start off and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, okay. Yeah. Wow. Where do I start? I'm 28. I live in Florida. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been an entrepreneur for the past 10 years. And it's been a wonderful journey. I've learned a lot. I learned a lot about myself, learned a lot about how the world works, and just constantly expecting the unexpected is kind of how I live my life, and just really trusting God. And I've started a new journey recently. I'm opening up a new business. I've decided to go back to school. I've set some new goals for myself. And Yeah, I feel as though I'm a multifaceted person. So there's like, it depends on who I'm talking to or what specific angle is how I introduce myself. Yeah, I think that's that's the basis that I leave for now. And I think as the conversation goes on, we'll get into some other things that might better help define who I am.
Okay. So you are an entrepreneur and you have some businesses, you're successful, you also do some coaching, but you recently decided to go back to school. Talk to us about that. Like, what made you at 28 decide to go back to school when you were already pretty successful if someone on the outside looking in?
Yeah. Uh, yeah, it was I think March of last year. Last year I just started doing more traveling. It's like I reached a place within like my business career as an entrepreneur where I felt like, I was very comfortable. I've reached a lot of my goals. So I started to enjoy life more. I kind of got away from that grinding 24/7, like never sleep and just work, work, work. And just started to live more, to travel more, do the things that I wanted to do. And after like going through that phase, I started to get bored again. And it's like I had all these goals that I set for myself in my early 20s, and now in my late 20s, I've accomplished them. And so it's just like I started to get bored. Like I literally kind of almost went into a state of like depression because I had so much time on my hands. Like I didn't
Mm,
have like a lot that I had to do to stay like productive and active in my life. There's only so much working out I can do. There's only so much yoga I can do. There's only so much traveling I can do before it's just like, all right, cool. Like what's next? And so I have been praying. I've been traveling and going to visit different cities. I was like, maybe I'll move to a new city and maybe I'll go into the tech business. That was like, maybe that'll be my next venture. So I went and traveled to some major like new tech hubs that are up and coming just to, see how things are going. And it just wasn't it. Like, I just didn't have that feeling like that was the move. That was just like my thinking, of just me analyzing the world and the way things are going. I was like, okay, this is going to be it. But it just didn't feel it, just I didn't have a peace about it. And if I don't have peace about something, I don't move on it. But then I ended up taking one more trip. I went to go visit one of my best friends. He was living in Hawaii at the time. And I promised him that I would visit him one more time before he moved. And he was just about to move. So I went out there in March. And while I was out there, I was just like, you know what? I'm just going to take this time just to be quiet, to disconnect, and just to really hear from God. And while I was there, just sitting on the beach, it just clicked for me. It was just like, go to law school. I was like, where is this coming from? Because in my early 20s, I always said that I would never go back to school. I was so like anti-school. But just over, like, as I begin to reflect on that, like over, the past 5 years, like I've run across different people in different seasons of my life, and law school has like come up, and it just so happened to be in one of my businesses, I have to deal with an attorney. And so him and I like talk very often. And then I have another friend of mine that recently finished law school, and like we had some conversations, and it's like, okay, I had enough input. And then now like I felt like I was hearing from God of it, like, this is what I'm supposed to do next. And so I kind of thought about it some more. And I ended up, when I came back to Florida, I thought about it some more again. And just, I had peace about it. I was like, okay, this is the next move, like what I thought I was supposed to be doing next. I don't have peace about it, but for some reason, this whole like idea of going back to school, I do have peace about it. And now, like being in that process of being back in school, I understand a little bit more of like why God is pointing me in this direction. There's still a lot I don't know, but I feel as though for where God is taking me, and again, as I said earlier, I'm a multifaceted person. The past 10 years, I've been in the trades business. I've been in construction, automobile type stuff, and now this is a transition into more like white collar work. And my goal, something that my dad always like taught me growing up, is that the best sermon that you'll ever preach is the life that you live. And so with this, I understand now that I'll have access to be able to go and be a light in different rooms and be able to relate to people from all backgrounds and classes. With now kind of getting this last little sharpening with going back to school. And it's been a phenomenal journey. Honestly, at first I was just kind of like, man, why did I sign up for this? Like, this ain't it. I don't need this, like I'm financially stable already. But what I realized is that, and this part of my journey of being a man, it is vital for me to be productive as possible, you know. And what I realized too is that I constantly need to be sitting before God and, staying aligned with my goals with him and not just what Caleb thinks. But I realized that I'm in a place right now just really being productive and building. And I've also learned that I want to always stay in that place. Like retirement, I don't think is for me, because like having experienced that, I want to always be doing something to stay sharp, and just constantly bettering myself and serving humanity, and realizing that that's my duty as a man. I think this has really helped me step deeper into my manhood and understanding that I'm here to build, I'm here to plant seeds, I'm here to till the ground, I'm here to work. And so this piece with going back to school is a part of that process. And then also, as a minority male, I want to be an example to other Black men. It feels amazing being back in the classroom now at 28 years old versus like when I was 18. I have a different focus. I have things that I'm responsible for. Like I have tunnel vision. And I know that there's a big discrepancy in the amount of Black women that are, highly educated versus Black men that are highly educated. And there's different reasons for that, right? But I want to be a role model and example, saying, hey, I've done both. Like I've worked with my hands every day. I've done, being on a roof, building, working on cars. And now like, hey, I can also on the flip side, speak to people like, hey, you can go back to school, you can do this. But it takes focus, it takes sacrifice, it takes hearing from God. So all of that, to sum all of that up, that's what this part of my journey is. I still don't know what all God has in store for me, but I know this is a part of the process of who I'm becoming next. This next part of Caleb Curl, as I step into my 30s, and just also hearing from a lot of my mentors and like understanding their journey. Like I'm realizing that I'm stepping into a prime phase of my life. And so I think this is just going to be one added piece, again, just to be a role model and example for whoever God sets me in front of to be able to speak and relate to on all planes of life.
One, I think it's great that you've embraced going back to school, because, who wants to do schoolwork? But, not letting your age, discourage you from going back, and the fact that you were successful in what you were doing and really, really being in line with your purpose. Like you really don't know where, but like, this is where you're supposed to be because of the peace. But I want to kind of talk about, so you're 28. I believe you're still single.
Yes.
And your focus really on like what you're called to do. And I think even for women, me and my girlfriends have spoken about this, sometimes we were so focused on relationships that we got distracted and really following our purpose. So now I'm in my 30s and I'm like, okay, I'm walking in it. And this absolutely is, I believe, is the season that this is supposed to happen. But sometimes, we're so focused on those other things that we lose focus and we get distracted where we can't really listen and understand the difference of tech is very popular, right? Everybody's getting into tech. It's good money in tech.
Right.
But you didn't find peace there, but you found peace in this other direction that you were not quite sure about. And I think that's powerful because our 20s, I do feel like we may waste a lot of time on some things that's really not purposeful, and it's not aligned with what we're supposed to do. And sometimes in our 30s, we're trying to catch up. I'm speaking from my own experience. But you mentioned having a responsibility. Did you mean a responsibility to other Black men or young boys when you talked about responsibility?
Responsibility to humanity as a whole, there's been so much going on. I don't want to go on a tangent, but there's been so much going on within media about men and how men are supposed to be and what men are supposed to do. And since I started school, I'm like, I'm disconnecting from all of that. And in doing so, I've been able to get really clear about myself as a man and what I'm supposed to be doing. And yeah, I do have a responsibility to my community. To better myself. I have a responsibility to my family. I have a responsibility to my future spouse and family. And this is a pivotal moment right now to be aware of that and to be working on that, to be discovering my purpose. Because I went through a phase of like feeling like, okay, like I'm in my purpose, like, and I'm kind of chilling, like I'm enjoying the fruits of my labor now. And there's a time and place for that. And that was good. But in that season, I started to focus on like relationships, like heavy, like, all of my friends around me within my immediate circle are married and starting a family, having kids, buying houses. And so I had to recognize that my journey is different. My call is different. I've just embraced that for myself, nothing against anybody else's journey, but like I am clear now that my purpose is what I'm married to right now. And along that way, if God brings that special person, when or if they come along, great. But either way, like this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. And I think it's also important for me as a leader, as a role model, as an example for any young man, but specifically minority men, to see a healthy Black man that is being progressive, that is working on himself, that has gone through the process, to show them that, hey, this is an option right here of what you can do with your life, that you can better yourself. Because I think a lot of young men, especially between the ages of like 25 to 30, it's a weird time for us, right? Because for men, we're valued as we get older. So that still being in your 20s is kind of like, all right, whatever. Like I hear you, but like I don't, and I've kind of like, I understand that now, and I'm okay with that because I understand that as I get older and just get wiser, there's a transition also biologically with like testosterone being able to kind of somewhat settle out so we can focus more. Because in our early 20s, like, and it's hard to think straight. We want to party, we want women, we want, and that ain't the case for all men, but just speaking for myself, like I see that transition out of me being able to be more focused. And again, I just think that's a part of my journey, being somewhat of a small public example for other men to follow. I think, there's a lot of fatherlessness that's going on within the minority community. And a lot of young men don't have examples to look up to, and I want to be that in some shape, form, or fashion, even if that's just within my own immediate family, for them to be able to say, hey, look at what Big Cuz did, or, whatever the case may be. It's clear for me that I'm called to be a leader. Again, I don't understand what all facets, or if, as far as, a brand, YouTube, different things. But I understand just right now that it's important for me just to be sharpening and just bettering myself in every aspect. I'm just being my best self, mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, and really not trying to get distracted and like pursuing a relationship or chasing women. Just like, at the same time, like if somebody comes along, I'm prepared, but I'm not actively like trying to look, but I will use whatever tools are available to me as far as like greeting and talking to people as I'm out, or if I do find someone that I'm interested in, but the focus right now is still the purpose. And that was a long way around.
Okay, no, but that's good, right? You're in line with your purpose. And you realize like, right now, this is what you're married to, as you said. You talked about being your best self.
Yeah.
And I talked to MJ a couple months ago about self-love, because
Yeah.
huge self-love, self-care advocate. But I feel like for men, it's not talked about that much. Like when I told my brother I was going to be talking to MJ, he had a list of questions. He was like, we don't talk about it. Like when I'm with my friends, we don't have those conversations. So for you, becoming the better version of yourself and thinking about self-love, do you think about that? Like, do you intentionally practice self-love when it comes to yourself?
Yeah, I think the big piece right now that I'm focusing on this season of my life is watching how I talk to myself, because I'm very goal oriented and very ambitious. So with that, I can be very like perfectionist mindset, and I can be hard on myself when I do make a mistake. But I'm very mindful of that. Like, Caleb, watch how you talk to yourself. God loves you, and so God lives inside of you. So as you're talking to yourself, you're talking to God, and there needs to be respect, there needs to be love and nurturing thoughts there. Because I'll have some moments where I'm like, man, I'm so stupid. Like, why did I make that mistake? Like, and I think it's common that we say little things like that when we make a mistake, but that words are powerful, and it's like, no, I'll just be out and about or in the shower. I'm like, I'm healthy, I'm wealthy, I'm intelligent, I'm a whole sounding complete man, just guarding my tongue, not necessarily with other people. I have that issue. I have that issue with myself of talking down to myself, being hard on myself. So I'm learning to love myself more by talking to myself better and being mindful of the words that come out of my own mouth to me, or just even my thoughts. But that comes from being mindful of what I listen to, how I allow other people to talk to me, just guarding my ear gates. So I think that's a part of my self-love journey right now. That's what I'm focused on. And then also talking to those brothers that are in my life more often. I think it's easier for us as men to become more isolated as we get older, because we're focusing more on our purpose, our career, business, whatever we got going on, and we can just be in the go, right? So after this, after we finish up this conversation tonight, I scheduled with one of my homeboys that lives in Dallas. Like, man, we haven't talked in a while. Like, we need to catch up, and I can tell, like, we don't talk very often, but every time we connect now, like, we're on that same wavelength of like, man, bro, we got to take care of ourselves, man. We gotta, I say I love you to my homeboys, and for some of them, that was weird for them because they never had that. My dad told me he loved me growing up, so it wasn't weird for another man to say I love you. I was never homophobic about it. And I've had to learn that with some men, that everybody's experience is different. But even little things like that, like connecting with other men, both in my age bracket that I grew up with, but as well as like mentors and like just seeking community, is very important, as well as MJ. MJ and I talk very often, just checking on each other. We verbalize like, bro, this is what I'm struggling with. This is where I'm weak. Because oftentimes as men, we're trying to hold the world up by ourselves, and we never can release that pressure, especially like in our single season, when you're trying to do the right thing and you're not out and, in the streets. It's a lot of pressure, like trying to do the right thing. And so I'm thankful for people like MJ being in my life, to where we can just call each other and just like, hey, bro, this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm struggling with. I need you. And just to be able to get some encouragement. And again, just being on that same wavelength with somebody and hearing their stories, just like, all right, cool. Like, man, it lets go of that, us trying to be perfect all the time and trying to like just be strong and macho, and have that balance of like, all right, cool. This is our release. This is our talk right now. All right, now I can go back and I continue to stand strong and to stand firm, and we continue to just sharpen and push each other. So that's one thing that I've been focusing more on the past 2 years, is connecting with other men that are like-minded and like we push each other. I got another homeboy that is in France right now, and we have a 30-minute call every week called Optimal 30, where we just encourage each other. We talk about what we're currently doing in business, what he has going on, what I have going on. And then we end the call and say, hey, bro, what can I be in unison in prayer for you in your life? What are you struggling with? Where do you need growth? So community and just my self-talk, and like just taking care of, again, like I said, like, what I'm intaking, but even how I eat, I'm more mindful of like what I'm putting in my body, how I feel, the connection between, my gut and my brain, just spirit, mind, body, like being holistic as possible, is another, piece of self-love for me.
I love the part about you saying I love you to your friends, only because your male friends, because I do think men don't experience that. Like me and my friends say I love you all the time, but I love to hear my brothers talk to one another. They're so close.
Yeah.
But you don't really see that amongst guys. So to be able to do that, I think it's important, but I also think it's important to build the relationship if you all have children in the future, because if you've never experienced it, it's hard to pass that down unless you're very intentional. Like, I'm going to break that pattern because it wasn't done to me.
Right.
So that's powerful. That's powerful. So as you're thinking about the relationships you have with your other guy friends, and you said specifically being kind to yourself, which is so important because the person we have the most conversations with our entire life is ourselves. So it is
Yep.
important to just speak positively. But as a man, when you think about like just the relationship you have with your friends, experiences that you've had, why do you think it's important to heal? And not just from, romantic partners, but just any experience, through life of hurt and pain, because it doesn't have to just come from someone you're in a relationship with. It can come from a sibling, a parent, or a friend. So is healing important to you? Because I get a different opinion when it comes to this conversation in our community.
Whew. Healing is important. It is important. But I think it looks different for men. Because it's a process, right? I think for men, like, we can take so much physical abuse and just like go on with our lives and not think twice about it. But like emotional pain really scars us. And I think that's oftentimes why a lot of men, we don't open up. And to take it a step further, especially like when it comes to romantic partners, like, I know for myself that I'm very cautious, like when I'm meeting someone or talking to somebody, about how far I let them in until I know whether or not I can really trust them, because I understand that's a very vulnerable side for me as a man. But yeah, healing has definitely, I was thinking about this the other day. There were some things that I was struggling with, like in my early 20s, that I just never thought I would, be able to get over. And I was constantly like beat myself up for the mistakes that I made at an age that I really didn't know much. I can't keep beating myself up for not knowing what I didn't know. And so having healed from that and just let that situation go, even situations from like growing up in the church, I think that's something else too within our community, struggling with a church hurt and church pain.
Mm.
Pushed me away from the church for a while, and my dad's a pastor. So like I was at the church a lot growing up. And so like as I became an adult and like, ventured out and found God for myself, I was just kind of like, I'm not interested in that. But I never traced the root of that. I never traced it back to, but it's because I had some church hurt. There was some healing that needed to take place. And so now, again, just having embraced that, this is the issue. I think just starting with that, just acknowledging that, hey, this is the issue. Like there's something wrong here, and that's okay. And I need to address it, and first by apologizing to myself. And then if I have access, if I felt as though I wronged somebody or somebody wronged me, and if it's accessible, having that conversation with those people or with said person. And I think that also provides healing. And I know everybody has their own, opinion about things. Some people, don't like to talk with people from their past, but I'll hit somebody out the blue and just be like, hey, you know what? Like, even if they wrong me, I'll take responsibility for my actions. Like, hey, I just want to apologize, for how I treated you, X, Y, and Z, yada, yada, yada. And in doing that, right, like in sowing seeds of forgiveness or asking for forgiveness, it's like a reciprocal process of that healing coming back to me, because I'm taking that effort to plant that seed and thinking about who I wrong. And so as I'm maybe providing healing in their life, that healing adversely comes, back to me. And so before, I never really thought about healing in my early 20s. I just used to power through things. Like, I know like there was some emotional disconnect or like pain, but I didn't have time to think about that. I was just going on to the next thing, just trying to keep myself busy versus now being productive and understanding that I can't be at my peak productivity if I'm struggling with a lot or compartmentalizing a lot emotionally, where healing needs to come in. And I just think for me personally, that's just growing closer to my walking relationship with God, because he'll bring certain things up that I'm like, man, I didn't even realize that I was still thinking about that. I literally had an issue that I thought about for like 6, 7, 8 years, and it had already gone by. But that's just the power of memory and things sticking with us and just having to be cleansed from those things. And I think that comes through healing. So I guess that kind of sums up my thoughts on healing and my own process.
So you mentioned earlier about just like disconnecting from the media and just the thoughts about what men should do. And there's a lot of back and forth when it comes to me, like a gender war. Like, there's just constant back and forth between men and women on all social media platforms. And I do think some pages actually intentionally post things to trigger the conversations that seem to be never ending. But, in a lot of conversations, I've heard different people speak about women doing the work to try to heal and better educate themselves. And I feel like there are a lot more men having those conversations as well. So that's why I asked about healing, because when I think about just legacy for me is not just for me to leave a legacy, right? Like, it's the community, it's my brothers and my nephews doing things differently. So when you think about even the conversations between men and women and a lot of the back and forth about what men should do, femininity, masculinity, just a lot. I think healing is a huge part of that because, and we talked about this in the singles house, I feel like a lot of people hold on to things that happened years ago. And I've heard and seen men talk about things that happened in middle school, and they're like, they react in life in their 30s based on something that happened 20 years ago. Yeah. So I just always have to ask that question, because I want men to hear other men who are healthy, who are working on themselves, a Black man, right? You are a man of color, talk about the fact that it's okay to heal. It's not just meant for women. And it's not something that you have to go through alone, because forgiveness is for yourself. It's not for anyone else. Yeah. So I had to ask you about that. But thinking about like some of the back and forth between men and women on social media, like, what are your thoughts about that? How do we overcome that? Do you pay attention to it? You may not be on social media that much. So have you noticed that is an issue?
Yeah, it has. I've noticed like the increase of it, right? And I personally just think it's spiritual warfare and it's nonsense, right? That's just talk. I'm at a place in my life where I want my actions to speak louder than my words. So that's why I felt the need to disconnect from it. Are you still there? Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, sorry if it froze up for a second. But yeah, I did notice the like uptick with, over the past couple of years about the whole like gender war and things going back. And it's just a lot of nonsense, it's a lot of people that some people, I feel like they're doing it from a good place, right? Where they're trying to inspire women, they're trying to inspire men. But I also see people like attacking men and attacking women, and it's just like it's not getting anywhere. So I focus more on the real world. I focus on the interactions that I have with women in my day-to-day life, and just leading by example, and I will have these conversations like in person, just over the internet. And I think there's a lot of room for people to do things for clout, and again, just where are we operating from spiritually and communicating about these things? For some people, it's simply about the views and just like going viral. And for some other people, it actually really is about healing. But I just got tired of it. So I was like, you know what, like this in general, like, and I've always had a love-hate relationship with social media, but I just came to the conclusion that like I'm going to focus on the real world and what I can personally do and impacting the lives of those that are around me and just leading by example as a man. And I don't have time for all that talking anymore. You know, like I'm going to focus on doing, being, and becoming more and showing, you know, because people just go on. It's easy to talk and to play a character online. You know, I feel
Yeah.
like a lot of people today have used the internet to profit from and just to act and just to pick a crowd and to pander to it. And I think that can be very unhealthy, especially for people that don't know how to think for themselves and are constantly glued to their phone. And when you're looking for a certain set of information, that algorithm is built to keep feeding you the same
Mhm.
content. You're not growing, you know? And so it's just fueling you to be able to regurgitate what somebody else has said online whenever you do meet somebody in the real world and they have opposing views, versus you really like having thought about what you personally think about this and what your actions say for your own life, and then be able to have a conversation from that point. But I oftentimes, you know, I talk to women about these things and their experiences of what they've gone through. And then I share like what I go through as a man. But more importantly, I focus on making sure that what I'm talking about and what I'm doing marry each other, you know? And I think that's important for us as men, is just to stop all the talking and just let your actions speak for you, you know? And just all of that back and forth, I think it's intentional, especially within our community, keeping discord, keeping a divide. And just at some point, like everybody has to get to a point where they really analyze and think for themselves, like, what is this doing for me? Like constantly watching this type of content. I had a conversation with one young lady one time that I had met, and she was just so like, men are toxic, men ain't this, yada yada yada. And I'm like, sis, like, who hurt you? You know, like what's going on? You know, and it's like we can start to put on this facade of something that doesn't really even exist in our own life, you know? And I like to ask the question, like, okay, what was your relationship like with your father? Like you're saying like men ain't this or that, but what about the men in your life that you know and that you love? Are they like this? All right, cool. So don't discredit them. Don't, because of one bad apple that you personally experienced, don't say that about everybody. And even myself, I've had to say the same thing. And I'm more mindful about how I talk about women. And even this past semester, I've taken some courses about women to better understand what women go through, you know, what they experience. So that way I can bridge the gap when I do have these conversations. So that way it's not a fighting, but it's a intellectual conversation where we're just explaining both sides and figuring out where we can meet and come together, because we're two different beings, you know. Men will never be women and women will never be men. I personally believe that's just the way God created us, but it's work. Like every aspect of our lives is work. And I think just a lot of people have gotten lazy in learning the opposite sex, and a whole, our society doesn't really educate us enough on it. And I think that's why we have a lot of issues. And a lot of people are getting online just to have a platform and just to profit off of the Discord at this point.
Yeah, I definitely think some of it's intentional, very
Oh,
intentional,
yeah. Sure.
um, to just get the reaction. But to your point about the young lady you were talking with, I, it goes back to what you said about like what you listen to, because there's so much that talks about like men being toxic, you know, men are no good. And as a single woman who, you know, desires to be married and have children, I have to be mindful of some of that stuff too, because it is easy to take that in and you start to think it, right? Without, you know, not even being aware of it. You believe it outside of your own experiences. And that's what you know. So I've even been mindful of like certain things I listen to on YouTube
Yeah.
where you know, it starts off one way and then I may start to soak it in, and then naturally like you find yourself even kind of getting angry, and you
Yeah.
don't realize why, but it's real what you feed your mind.
Yeah.
So thinking about, you know, what you said about, you know, like you said to her specifically, like what about the men in your life? So you grew up in a two-parent household, which I know you talked about when we were in the singles house. And, you know, one thing I enjoyed about your perspective about relationships and marriages is even when I look back on some of the episodes that were aired, your perspective is different from mine because my parents divorced when I was 11. So those later years as a child, I wasn't in a two-parent household. And I acknowledge and recognize some of your things that you thought about, or your outlook was different, and I had to be open to understand that. So being raised in a two-parent household, how do you think that's molded you into the man you are today? And then also, how has it influenced your outlook on relationships in marriage? Because growing up in a single parent household with my mom, even though, every other weekend we were with my dad, it still played a huge impact on relationships. That's a part of my childhood trauma, is my parents' divorce. So how has that influenced you when you think about relationships and marriage?
Oh man, it's everything. It's my experience. It's what I know. It's my first look at love, you know. Granted, I've seen a lot of movies, a lot of like romance stuff like on TV, but I saw the reality like in my parents. My parents have been married 37 years now. And they just kept it real, like it wasn't always lovey-dovey. Like they've had, um battles that they've had to overcome, and we witnessed that growing up. And even literally yesterday I was talking to my mom because I just recently had my 10-year reunion, and I was just telling her some things about the reunion and just like how grateful I am. Like I'm at peace with being a single man right now. Like I don't desire to be anywhere else but where I am currently. And she just had her 40th reunion, and they were talking about marriage and just the reality of it. Just like she was saying, like, when we're younger, we focus so much on the superficial side of things versus like looking at a person's character, their spirit. Are they kind? How do they speak and talk to other people? Are they responsible? Like things like that. And so just my mom and dad always just being open and honest with me, and then just visually like seeing that, hey, this is work. It is not easy. It's not always like how it is on Hollywood, and it's just like there's like butterflies and rainbows every single day. Like, no, it takes work. It takes effort. It's love. Love is work. Everything on this earth is work, but all things are possible my personal belief, if our spiritual beliefs, like what it's founded on, if it's just founded on materialism and the superficial side of things, then yeah, that's what you got to depend on to sustain that marriage. But when it's found on something that's bigger than you rely on prayer and God to lead you in the right direction when you can't figure it out yourself. You can't hold it up. But man, just seeing my father and just understanding his transition, because my dad, changed his life around before he had me. And I've talked to my uncles and like other relatives about like, what was my dad like growing up, and I'm like, dang, like that, he really changed. He really worked on himself, right? And for his generation, I think that was self-love, that he knew that he needed to be better, and he did something to change that by actions. He maybe didn't verbalize that all the time, that, hey, son, this is what I learned about like self-love, this or that. It was different for his time period and era, right? Times were a lot harder, a lot tougher, and as well as for the generation before them. So a lot of things weren't verbalized or passed down, but it was done through action. So just hearing about that, and then seeing who my dad is, and just seeing that my dad and my mom as well, like they were, my dad went into the military and was a blue collar, guy, and just always had a, hard work ethic, and just had a mentality that he can do anything that he put his mind through, and standing on Christ. And my mom took the route of like going to school, has her master's degree. So I got a balance of like seeing two different worlds connect and come together, but like making it work. And just the balance between the masculine and the feminine, right? So growing up, my dad raised me to be a man from a boy, right? I remember we had a hurricane that hit Pensacola when I was maybe like 8 years old. And my dad was just like, hey, like, there's people, my dad's being a pastor, there's people within the church that need help. There's trees down, people can't get out of their house or their driveway. We're going to go over here, we're going to cut some trees down, and, yada, 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 right? My dad passed me a chainsaw at 8 years old, and I was driving his truck at that time by myself. And he was basically like, look, I'm going to show you how to do this. And you are a man, you are to be responsible, and you are to go and do this. And I expect for you to do what I told you to do, and to be safe, to be watchful, to be alert, and to be mindful. So having that type of like masculine energy to say, I believe in you, hey, this is dangerous, but you can do that, it does something to you. It does something to your psyche as a man, that you tap into, and you just go into work mode, right? And then that way, when I come home, it's a balance with my mom between not always being coddled and babied, you know, like there would be times where my mom would maybe say to my dad, like, no, he don't need to do this. And he's like, no, like as a young man, this is what he needs to do. Because he knew that as a boy, he had to raise me to be a man right now, you know, not later. And so my dad was a lot stricter on me with certain things than maybe he was with my sister, you know, because we have different roles that we have to play. So being raised in a household where I got to see it, but I also had to live it in the way that they both instilled certain values into me. One thing that my mom always did to build me up is I went to a majority white school growing up, right? But and so at a young age, I never verbalized this, but I went through this transition of like not really understanding myself as a Black man. And like having this identity of like, am I supposed to be white? Why am I so different? Why am I treated so different when I go in a classroom and I'm the only one that looks like me? But every day that my mom would pick me up from school, she would just say, you are such a beautiful, chocolate, handsome Black boy. I just want you to know that. Just every day she would just give me that, you know? And so it was just the balance between the two, you know, and I think that is wealth. That is wealth for our community right now. If we can come together and understand that marriage is work on ourselves first. But man, I think our that's what our community needs. I think right now there's a lot of hype about getting to the money, getting to the bag, being a boss, being independent. But man, what about being a father, being a wife? Being a two-parent household, it's never easy, you know. And again, I experienced those hardships with seeing my parents have to grow through certain things while being career driven people, being leaders within a community, being husband and wife, and being parents, you know. And it's just such a beautiful thing now, just be able to talk to my parents, and we're like, they're so open about their struggles and their hardships. And so that's why I still believe in marriage, but I also understand that it's work. And I'm so thankful for a two-parent household, and I enjoy being able to share my experiences because I now realize how rare it is. Growing up, I didn't understand that, like that I was a minority in that sense as well. I just remember like even kids from the church would come home with us after church. And I just remember like there was this one guy that was in our church. He would come home and like he would always want to come over to our house, and reason being is because he saw like wholeness there, you know. Like the household that he grew up in, like unfortunately it was a lot going on, you know. And I I have a desire now to be able just to share that, you know, whether it's just my own experiences of growing up with that, or even again, just the life I live, if God sees it fit for me to be married, understand that marriage is more than just about us, but it's a ministry. And that ministry is seeing people work together and depending on God to get through something, you know? And so that's what I think it is to me. It is, I understand now, like how fortunate I was, and I'm so grateful for my parents, and I do my best to like ask questions as often as I can about marriage and different things, and just hoping that that becomes more of a common thing within our community, you know, because I know it's hard to believe in something when you haven't seen it, you know. And so representation matters in all facets within our community, but that's one right there that I'm hoping that we can get more exposure around, and being able to collectively come back together, and back to our previous conversation, this like bickering and fighting, but understanding there's power with two or more coming together as a unit.
Yeah, absolutely. That was good. I love the part about your mom reminding you that you were a cute or beautiful chocolate young boy, whatever you said. Because I think for young boys and young girls, especially in our community, they need to hear that. Because somebody else, you know, there's bullies in school, or if you go to predominantly white school, you may not hear that. You may question why you look different. And I do think that's important that our especially our young boys hear that,
Yeah.
because you know it starts very young to build that confidence in you all, right? Because most men, I think, will say they had it really tough and they didn't hear "I love you," or you know, girls, you hear "Oh, you're so cute," but I love that. So that warmed my heart a little bit with your mom. So okay, so you grew up in this two-parent household. You realize you're a minority. And you may even realize in conversations, I don't know if you really pay attention to that, but you even have a different outlook. And that's something I picked up on when we were talking about it in the house. But when you interact with women who don't come from a two-parent household, do you notice there's some challenges, whether you're just in a talking phase, you're dating, when it comes to expectations for relationships or just communicating?
Absolutely, absolutely. It's very clear. It's almost that I can look at a woman and almost know, just by observing her. Yeah, like I don't know how to explain it, but God has given the men a gift of like just being visual creatures that we're just very observant and like we can read and understand things. But especially like when it comes to conversation, like when I like voice to women that, hey, like, I still believe in marriage and yada yada yada, or I even say like, my parents are still married, it's such a like shock. Not all the time, right? Like I do run across people that are from two parent households. But yeah, there's a difference. There's a difference. And just even how I move. I'm a very, traditional man. I understand leadership because my dad is a leader. My dad is also a leader within our community. So I saw my dad lead in so many ways that it's natural to me. So when going out on a date or just doing things, just whenever they see me, like see my actions, it's kind of foreign. So they're like, this is weird, you know? And it also sometimes it scares women off because it's almost too good to be true. It's like, all right, what's wrong with him? Like, why are you being so nice to me? But I'm just being myself. I'm just being normal. Even to the point I've always struggled with growing up, and I didn't understand this, but I've always struggled with um platonic friendships between the opposite sex, right? Because I grew up seeing such a different point of view. I can just be nice to a woman and I don't have an ulterior motive. Like I'm just being myself. Like this is how I was raised. This is how I was taught, just to interacting with the opposite sex. But I've also struggled with, like, I've had to understand that, you know what, there are a lot of people that haven't seen that. There's a lot of people that have experienced a lot of hurt. And so when a man is just being overly nice or just like what appears to be overly nice, but me just being myself, I've had to learn to tone that down because I might be giving off mixed signals, and that ain't the case. Like I'm just being myself. So there are just certain things, just like in talking, with women and getting to know them, that I've had to learn to be more gracious, like about and with, and even just how I lead and how I do things. And I'm very like opinionated, and I will voice my opinions, and it's just sometimes there's certain things that I do is just like it catches women off guard. But I've learned to like just to communicate and to ask questions. So now like I'm very inquisitive when getting to know somebody, and I keep it a natural flow in conversation. And I've learned as a man to communicate and over communicate when dealing with the opposite sex, to let them know where I'm at, what my viewpoints are, where I stand. And depending on where we are, like if this is somebody that I'm pursuing and towards like a relationship and dating, this is my standard and this is how I move and how I operate. So I think leading by example, like saying what I'm going to do and doing my best to match that, right? And I'm not ever going to be perfect with that, but again, just leading by example and showing them what I know, showing them what the example that I had, having a healthy father and role model in my life, like re-implicating that in my interactions with them, and showing them that, hey, there are good men out here, that, hey, everybody is not out trying with an ulterior motive, everybody not trying to get in your pants. Like I'm just simply being nice. I'm from the South. That Southern hospitality is just in me. So if I'm opening doors or I say I got the check or something like that, that's just me being myself. But that's also me being the man that my dad raised me to be, as well as my mother.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's important what you said about also asking questions. You mentioned earlier about like the boss movement and being independent. And a lot of women growing up in a single parent household, specifically their mothers, that's all they know.
Right.
Okay. I'll say that's all we know because, even though my dad was around, my mom was the primary, right? She was my primary parent. And, sometimes when it comes to success and sharing accomplishments, because I've heard some guys say, like, don't lead with that. But that may be all she knows to lead with, because when she was, raised, her accomplishments is what made her and defined her. So as she's navigating the relationships, she's trying to communicate with you that, hey, this is who I am. And who she is all of her accomplishments. So I like that you're asking questions to try to get to understand. Because when you don't see that healthy relationship, it's a challenge. You make, something as simple as opening doors and getting the check. A woman probably will say, I got it, but that's because that's all she knows is to have it. And that's what she saw her mom do. So I like that you're giving grace. And I think it's definitely a two-way street when it comes to you learning women and then us also learning, understand there are gentlemen out there that want to just be gentlemen without expecting anything in return.
Yeah, and I also think, again, it just leadership, just actions, right? I've run across women who broadcast, the like independent, I'm a boss, I don't need a man, type vibe on the internet. But then when they come around me and just like the energy that I carry, it's like it tones them down because I'm walking in who I know to be, again, going back to my purpose of like really connecting with myself, disconnecting from the world, being more connected with God. I know who to be. And so whenever as we are visual creatures and pay attention to things, y'all are very extremely emotionally intelligent and y'all pick up on those cues, right? So when you're around a man and he makes you feel safe, it's gonna feel weird at first, right? But the more you're around it, like, and I've had women tell me this, like, wow, like Caleb, like, listen, like this is different. It's gonna take me some time to adapt, but this is different, and I appreciate that. But I guard myself and keeping boundaries too, and so again, I think it just goes back to men just learning that and just being very, very keyed in on their actions. It's easy to be a salesman and to have game and to talk the talk, but when you go around somebody and you see how they move, how they act, that's what women pay attention to, and that's what sets the tone. Being able to set a precedence that, hey, like when you're around me, you can trust that you're going to be safe, you're going to be protected, you're going to be provided for. And I think that's what women want, not even always on the financial tip, but just knowing that you will speak up for me, that you will highlight my femininity. You will tell me that I'm loved and that I'm beautiful. That same lessons that I learned from my mother saying that to me, I now understand that that's important for me to communicate to my future partner. So again, that's this whole reciprocal process of the balance between the two and seeing that. And it's so crazy too, just how, and I this is something that I think about within our community, is how many of us did not grow up seeing two parents in a household, but the American dream is so prevalent in front of us. Many of us also didn't grow up with money, but we have this desire for money and for riches and for wealth, right? So I oftentimes think about that, but it goes back to representation, things on media, even movies and stuff that we watch. Like I don't see a lot of us like as a unit, as in a positive way, and who knows, I'm not going to go deep into that of why that's the case. But again, going back to what we were talking about earlier about the disconnect and just this discord that's going online, we got to like let that go and understand that that is spiritual warfare and that God has created us to be two halves to a whole. And we have to connect, we have to learn to love one another and learn about the opposite sex, right? So my challenge for the ladies out there that you have grown up seeing nothing but toxic men, go and do research on healthy men, right? There is somebody out there that you can go read about. Go read Dr. Tony Evans' books. Go watch a Tony Gaskins. There are examples out there, but you got to go and look for those things. At a certain point in time of our life, we have to learn to take responsibility for where we're at and for where we're going. And we got to stop complaining about like, oh, this is all I had, or this is all that I've seen. All right, cool. Go and educate yourself. Just as you were so driven for that career and for that money, you had to put yourself in some different environments and read some different books. You got to have that same drive for other aspects of your life if you plan on being healthy in that area and not just complaining and talking about it.
Yeah, you're right about, especially, when you think about the desire to see a healthy relationship or just a healthy man who loves their wife and has no problem talking about their wife and the relationship and marriage. Even R.C. Blake's and Jerry Flowers are two others that come to mind that I listen to often because they speak positively, but they also hold men and women accountable. It's not pointing the finger. They're going to call everybody out about what we need to do. But you mentioned something that I think a lot of men don't realize, and I'm happy you said about femininity. So I consider myself to be successful. I can take care of myself. I don't lead with that in conversations. One, because I have learned that some men will focus on certain things. So I would just say I work in customer service, and that has worked for me.
Yeah.
But I want to be in a situation where, regardless if I'm financially can take care of myself, someone wants to provide and protect and lead. And I don't know that a lot of men that I've encountered, some know how to lead or think they have to lead. So women have this, they've had this experience where they've had to be the leader in the relationship, and that's all they know. So when they enter new relationships, or if they meet someone of the opposite sex, well, that's the first thought, because we've had to do it so much, because maybe the guy doesn't want to be a leader. But when you create that safe space for a woman, and you create an environment where she can embrace her femininity, it's like all hands, it's everything. You have what you need, because when you create that space for her to embrace her femininity, she will respect your masculinity. She will be a partner. She will help you flourish, and you help her flourish. And those are the things that I've had to learn over the last couple of years. Like, all right, what do I really desire? Regardless of what I have, I still want somebody to provide and protect and be a leader. And we kind of talked about this before. When I come home, I don't want to lead. That's my desire when I get married. Like, I want to be a partner. I want to be a teammate, but I want to be able to have a partner who, when I come in, like, I could trust him to lead the household, ask my opinion, like, what do you think about this? But me being a leader at work, I don't want to come home with that same hat. I want to be able to take it off and trust that he'll make the right decision. And I think men have to know that that's what a lot of women desire, even though they don't know how to express it. I hear a lot of women talk about that, but they don't know how to say, like, this is what you want. So it comes across still very, I want to be independent and I want to lead the household. But I think a lot of women truly do desire that.
And I agree, right? But just as you asked me about like my interaction with women that come from single household,
Mm-hmm.
women have to understand that they got to look at the statistics of our community, that a lot of men come from similar households, right? So where they had that interaction and they saw that mother be that leader, that man just saw his mom, right? But it is important for a man to see another man. And if he didn't, he's just thinking about how his mom treated him, right? And so when that man is not there, it oftentimes creates a balance of like being babied, right? And so where the daughter might pay attention to the hustle and mom having to be a provider, the son might pay attention to mom nurtures me, like mom caters to me, And so not to say that's the case for everyone, right? But women, especially Black women who desire to marry a Black man, have to understand that and be willing to work with that, and understanding that we're all coming from different backgrounds and we all have a story, but being more gracious with that, and just understanding the times that we're in, that Black women, there are more Black women than there are Black men that are going to be educated, right? And so again, thinking about my mom and dad, if my mom had that same mindset, like, she wouldn't have been with my dad. My dad never went to college, but my dad is a hardworking man. My dad is faithful. My dad has done amazing things with his life. But sometimes I think just in this day and age, we focus too much on the wrong things, right? Like we made marriage and relationships about us and about getting out of the space of being lonely, about it being a ministry and about it being purpose-filled, right? And so with that, with it being bigger than us, we have to understand that I got to really understand this man. And maybe right now, he's not going to understand how to lead me because maybe he didn't have that, but I'm willing to work with him as he's willing to work with me on some things that maybe I don't understand as well. So I think that's the conversations that we have to start having, and understanding that we all come from a different place and we all got to be gracious and just have an understanding of like where we are as a whole, and just look at the statistics on things and the likelihood of the person that you might end up with, So if you're solely focused on like, how he leads this or that, and don't understand any other aspects to him being a man, then we're kind of like destined to fail and to never come back together as a collective, So again, as I have to be mindful of like, okay, I might come across a young lady that has never seen a healthy figure in her life. I got to be a little bit more gracious, a little bit more patience. The same thing for women on the opposite side, got to be a little bit more gracious, a little bit more patient, but communicate, right? But keep communicating from a place of like understanding and asking questions. I oftentimes, something else that I've seen too, is that women, just because society in general, we hold men to such high regard, and women are to be protected in society by men, right? That's just the way things are. And so what happens is that I've met certain women, and they have this high regard for what a man is supposed to do, and want to automatically like critique me before getting to know me. I'm like, you don't even know me, you
I
know?
can see
Why
that.
are you
Okay.
trying to tell me about myself? Don't try and tell me how to be a man. You don't know where I'm coming from. You don't know what I've gone through. You don't know what I'm currently struggling with. You know, that's just like immediately, like I meet a young lady, I know nothing about her, and I say something about her weight. That's out of line. That's out of pocket, right? But it's like double standards for like things. So that's something else that I've had to like talk to some of my homegirls about. Like, as you're talking to a guy, get to know him. Show him that you can be a safe space, right? And I think it becomes a reciprocal thing. Like, as you learn to take your time and get to know somebody, and you slowly let your guard down, the first thing I think for women is just like showing that, hey, I can close my mouth and I can listen to you as much as you listen to me, you know. And just truly just that friendship phase of just like, I want to know your heart, I want to know what you've been through, and I can trust you can trust me with that information. So all in all, I think it's just, we got to be gracious with one another and just understand where we are as a community, and understand this is where we have to build from.
Yeah, I think communication is definitely important in friendship. I was just listening to a podcast earlier about a pastor saying a lot of the couples, the marriage counseling, they're trying to become friends after the marriage because that wasn't the foundation. So I think that's important, because I think there are a lot of relationships where individuals don't necessarily like one another. It's just that you're lonely and the person is filling that gap, and it fills that void. And I've been there.
Yeah.
I've been there, so I can relate.
Yeah.
But I do think it's important for men as well. And this is not me pointing a finger, but this is this is what I pray for. So I know I've done the work. When I pray for a partner, I'm praying for someone who is doing the work. Because if someone comes to me and we meet, I think I don't know if I'm in a place or will be in this, and maybe I will be, where I can say, you know, let me allow you to grow into figuring these things out. Because I think along the healing journey and growth, you identify your triggers, and you know how to control those. You know when not to respond. And also, you don't want somebody. I don't want someone that will be intimidated. So even with the conversation about mothers and the coddling, a lot of men I've met be like, my mom worked 3 jobs and she did this to the car. And I'm like, I don't know nothing about a car. I'm not changing nothing on a car. I don't want to learn nothing about a car. But they have these expectations based on their single mother. And I've said to some men, why don't you ask your mom, did she want to do that? And hear from her that she didn't have a choice. So although she made it happen, hear from her heart the nights where she probably cried, where she wanted to be home with you. So you can understand, although she may have worked 2 to 3 jobs, she didn't want to. So you don't necessarily expect that from your wife. There are some men that think that way. Like, my mom worked 2 to 3 jobs. And I think it's a communication, not just where we're communicating like you and I, but it's so important for us to communicate with our parents in the older generation, because some of the expectations that were set, they gave based on their capacity. Like, I'm learning about my mom, my dad, the things that they did that I do not agree with. Well, I had to forgive because they gave what they could, and it doesn't make it right. And I have my own truth and my experience, and I asked them to respect my truth and my experience because they may not understand it. But I do think it's also important we think about communication. Let's not just communicate this way, like between you and a potential partner, but when you have certain expectations, or when you're trying to navigate your way through what growth looks like, don't be afraid to reach out to like the older generation to get a better understanding. Because and I've seen men talk about it, but I'm like, your mama did not want to work 2 to 3 jobs, but she had 5 kids maybe, right? So she had to make those things happen. Same thing with parents. My dad has always worked 2 jobs. He's retired and he's still working. I'm like, why are you working? Learn how to play golf. but that's just the only thing he knows. So it's so important for us to get a better understanding. And I think that will help. At 36, Caleb, I don't know how much, like, to, let me be fair, based on my experience, a lot of men can be intimidated when they feel like you have everything or you're the leader. So when you try to allow them the opportunity to do it, they don't see it that way. That's my experience, I should say. But it could be
Okay.
also based on the household they were raised in.
Okay, but in your heart of hearts, do you believe that there's a man out there that will be able to accept that? Do you see yourself being able to disconnect your faith from your experiences? Because I think oftentimes it's hard for us to do that. And sometimes, as we're talking about with healing, sometimes that thing can be so subconsciously rooted that we don't believe that God can really provide that based off of we've had it so many times that our experiences outweigh our faith. So do you believe that that exists?
I do. And that's why I say I'm intentional about my prayers, because I want to meet someone who, I don't think we would ever get to a point where we're completely healed, but it's
Right.
a person who is aware of their growth, like, have to have a growth mindset, and they are actually working on themselves now. Because when you meet someone who's not healed, and I've been that person as well,
Yeah.
it can be exhausting to take on that energy, because you want to support them, you care about them. But when people have triggers that they're not aware of, that can be a mountain in itself, because they're responding in past experiences, and I've done the same. So now that I'm more self-aware and I want healthy and effective communication, I know that person has to also be tapping into some of those things, so we don't bump heads. Because I think we all sometimes react based on experience, but we have to be self-aware that the experiences can't lead the future.
Right, right. Yeah, yeah. And I think that that's a hard one. That's a hard one because I think our brain, anytime we go into a situation, is always calculating like what happened last time. And
Mhm.
I think it takes a lot of prayer, a lot of fasting, just, God, I'm really trusting you with this and really walking by faith in those situations. Even myself, I have to remember that to not let me not judge this person based off of any experience that I've had. And this is a clean slate. This is a new relationship. This is a new person altogether. And to go back to what we were talking about with the friendship phase, I think that's why that friendship phase is so important, because when we meet somebody new and it's just simply, we know this is a platonic thing, like just meeting somebody at work, right? There's no expectations. We just slowly get to know them. But when we meet somebody that we're attracted to, there's this thought process like, oh my God, is this my husband? Is this my wife? Like,
Mhm.
ooh, I wonder what my last name sound like with their last name, stuff like that, right? It's hard to disconnect because we've been so programmed based off of the media and things that we've consumed in our society that, again, experience and faith. And I'm still figuring that out myself. That's why, I asked you, but yeah, I think it's a risk. Love, um, uh, it's a risk, it's work, but again, I think just spiritually being at a place where we're really trusting God and like being intentional about that throughout the process. And I know I've been guilty of that in my past, right? Like I met someone, and this was at a phase in my 20s where I was like, man, all my homeboys married, I gotta be out here like trying to settle down, like I want my kids to be around the same age, all that stuff, right? And I found myself rushing and like, all right, God, is this the girl that you have for me? And then allowing the infatuations and the feelings and the excitement that I have when I hang out with that person, like, oh yeah, this is definitely from God, and then not pray about it again. So that's something else that I've learned, is just like being patient and being able to disconnect from my emotions and being able to get back to that spiritual place. Kind of like when Abraham had to take Isaac to the altar, and that thing that God promised him, that blessing, that thing that he wanted so bad and finally got, and now God, you want me to bring it to an altar to sacrifice? It's that disconnect. It's like really that marriage and relationship with God, I'm personally like learning that like has to be first no matter what. And it's easier said than done.
Yeah, I agree. I definitely think that is an important. That's the foundation, because I've dated guys who we are not on the same, we are not on the same page when it comes to that. and try to make it work. And it's like, it's just not going to work. So I do think that is important. But to your point, your faith is important. Like, I know in this season where I'm open to dating, but I'm not looking to date. I probably should go out a lot more. I don't. But I feel like I'm in a season where I'm open to the thought of dating. And then I'm just intentional about my prayers and what I'm doing to prepare myself for that person. Because if I'm the better version of myself and I'm taking care of myself and I'm loving myself and I know what I desire, then I won't settle, or I won't get into that. What is my last name? What does it sound like with his last name when you first meet someone? Because that is, I'm sure for men and women, that's your first thought. Like, what does it be like if we got married and have kids, and then we just bypass all these red flags because we're now in the honeymoon stage, especially if they get physical. Everything gets cloudy. So, I appreciate you having that conversation, just going into detail, because we're not always going to be, we're always going to agree specifically on everything when it comes to relationships. But I do like to hear the perspective of your thought process. Just like you said, you're thinking about having the grace for men and women. And I think we do have to, if we want to really build our community. And that's what legacy is all about. And that's what my podcast came, about. I want people here that will talk about the tough conversations that we just do not talk about, and that prevents us from moving forward, because it's these type of conversations that really empower us to do the work, give grace, forgive, and then think about what we need to do to really build up our community. Absolutely. So Caleb, is there anything else that you would like to share before I let you go?
No, I always enjoy these conversations. Again, like no two people agree 100% on everything, but I love your viewpoint. I love that you think for yourself. It shows that you've taken time to reflect over your life, over what you've grown through. And just, I think this right here is healing, especially between the opposite sex. We come and we hear one another and hear different viewpoints. If we could just learn to do that and to not be so attached to like what we think and what we believe, and be able to hear somebody else just like, okay, all right, cool. I never thought about it like that. That's different. I think that's one thing at the Singles House that we all took away. And having people from all walks of life in one house and having some very tough conversations. I know that that event, I learned a lot, and I was so thankful to have met you and to hear from your experiences. That's one thing too, that like in this phase of my life that I constantly have to remind myself, Caleb, be more gracious and understand that everybody has not seen what you've seen and you have not seen what they've seen. And there's wealth in that, right? Because we all can learn from everyone. We have to just let go of whatever prejudices that we have against people, because we all have them, and be able to just listen and learn and just understand them for them, versus like listening to try and gauge somebody or put them in the box or say that, oh, my opinion's this and that, or I'm better, I'm right, they're wrong. No, it's just about conversations and learning. And I think this is, this, as well as the house experience, I just wish more people could do this. I think this provides so much healing and just clarity, just being able to talk to one another and communicate. I think today we have become very isolated with the advancement of technology, just the world shifting, right? And there's no finger to point, but I think more people are spending a lot more times by themselves, consuming information and not having a lot of conversations with like people in the real world or people that they interact and love. But I feel like this is like growth, and I just really, really appreciate you being in your purpose and just listening to God and thinking of me. Like I know I have some crazy opinions and thoughts. Thank you for allowing me to voice them and to share them. And just thank you for just you being you. And I really love this haircut on you.
Thank you. Thank you. I did not think I would like it. So it's just crazy that I love it, but thank you. But no, I absolutely thought about you, leaving the Singles House. You all really just opened my mind to think differently not only, you know, as a woman, but from the male perspective and what you all go through, and being gracious when I'm having conversations, or not judgmental. So that's why when I thought about you, and just even listening back to the conversations when they aired, I was like, okay, you know, that's different from how I would have looked at that.
Yeah.
But I also understand that we have different experiences growing up. So it
Yeah.
made me value your perspective completely differently. Even if I don't agree 100%, which I'm not saying I didn't, but it's being open to understanding that you may not agree with someone, or you may not even know if you agree with someone, because you have to have time to process it versus shutting down and being
Right.
defensive.
Right.
And that was the one thing that I really enjoyed about just you speaking about your experiences and your perspective. So I thank you for joining me, because this is a part of building a legacy in our community. I know
Yeah.
you have a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
So if people want to subscribe and follow on YouTube, how can they find you?
Yeah, yeah. My YouTube channel is Caleb Curl. Just type it on YouTube and it'll come up. I am currently on a little bit of a break. I am not your traditional YouTuber. I pop on when I can and speak what I feel like God wants me to say at that time. Then I take a break and get off. But we got some videos up, so if you want to check them out, it's just type in Caleb Curl and I'll come up. But my Instagram's the same thing. I'm not on Instagram right now, so take that as well. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I appreciate you, Caleb. It was good talking to you, and hopefully we can have you again in the future.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for your time. Happy holidays. Much love, sis.
Happy holidays to you too.
Alrighty.